Hello everyone, this is the LDARC Tiny 8X. Comes with 8.5mm motors, 25 milliwatt VTX, 800 TV line camera, 48mm tri-blade props, pH 2.0 battery connector. Mine came with an FrSky XM receiver, comes with 3 extra canopies, 10 sets of multicolored props, 2 extra battery leads, prop remover, a tiny meter for your batteries, extra rubber bands, grommets, and screws, 3 batteries, and instructions that cover all 3 models, and a charger you can use at home or in the field. So the hoop craze continues, and I oftentimes, if you've been to the channel before, I will fly a lot of these machines inside the house, and I will fly them in acro mode. Unfortunately, this one just didn't quite have the throttle response I needed to actually pull off a full flight of acro mode inside. So the flight that you will be seeing is in horizon mode, and that is a little bit of that self-stabilization jerkiness that you'll find. Others that fly more consistently in that mode or in angle mode, you'll find that they'll have probably a smoother flight. So mine has a little bit of that self-stabilization or jerkiness in there. These extra rubber bands that come in the kit are for securing your motor leads, and here's a little bit of a layout of the board down here. It does come with Betaflight, and you can program the different modes and different switches for your machine as you choose. You can see I've got a little bit of a bent up prop, and that's because, you know, I crash quite a bit. I always fly these things all sorts of times before I put together a review. I've got some dirt. I did fly it outside. And the reason why we're talking about this before we get to the flight is primarily one issue that I'm just not certain about. And this motor does not spin up on its own. You have to kickstart it. So that could be impacting the performance that I suffered from when trying to do acro mode. I might not have just been able to get it because on brush boards, when one motor doesn't perform, it kind of brings all the performance down of all 3 motors. And I'll show you that here real quick. So I've got my radio over here, my arm switch is right here. I know you can't quite see it all, but what's most important is over here on the screen. And you'll note that this prop does not spin up. I'll flip it on to arm. Feel how everything's racing. So in short, I can't be certain that the performance that you see in flight that's coming up is actually going to stand across all the different models that they have of this. You know, they have the different basic version, the advanced version. I think there's one other version as well. I think it did fly pretty well, even with that motor that wasn't performing quite up to par. And at first I thought it was a prop slipping. So I took a needle and some super glue and I stuck it up in the prop hole. Then I let that dry. And then after doing that on a series of props and still not getting this prop to spin up on a regular basis, I started flicking it. And I noticed that it would then fly normally, or what appeared to be normally, as far as this case in particular. You can see the frame has an LED here on the back, and that's nice, especially if you're flying with friends. You'll notice there's some glue right down in there, and that's on the lead for the LED. That looks and appears to be hot glue. We also have 2 other buttons down there. We have the boot and the button to change your VTX, so you'll need to get something down in there. I like to use something plastic because you do have it powered on. And so then you click that button to get different channels on your VTX. You are limited on this particular VTX to 16 channels, so you don't get the full spectrum of bands and channels available to you. And that's very, very normal for the King Kong or LDARC products. They seem to be sticking to that for whatever reason. It could be so that it's legal in all countries. I'm just not certain of that. A couple things that you should note about the charger. If you charge it via USB, you can't charge on all 6 connectors. You can only use 3 at a time. And I suspect because USB output is limited, it will charge at a slower rate versus if you charge via a battery, you'll be able to charge all 6 and it will probably charge faster. In my testing, I didn't actually run a stopwatch next to it to see the difference in testing, but I can't imagine that our USB port is able to keep up with a battery. But it is nice to have a field charger, and they've got a little heat sink here to dissipate heat if we need that. And we've got both connectors for the original, so if you have an original connector for a Tiny Whoop type of machine, you can use this charger as well. It does come with high volt batteries, and you see that they're LDARC branded. This is pretty typical. We're seeing this size and shape of battery, especially with high volt, pretty normal across a lot of different machines now. So this battery isn't necessarily special. You might find different C ratings, and C ratings are primarily marketing mumbo jumbo. There's no standard unit of getting a C rating, or at least a standard that the companies seem to be sticking to. The C ratings kind of vary widely from label maker to label maker. When you fly this thing outside, you will notice that I include some flight footage at the very end outside, that when you get going fast forward and then you try to do a yaw, that an arm does drop. And that is very typical of these hooped machines when flying in fast forward flight. And what we've found over time to handle that is actually we need to reverse motor direction and reverse props. Now with a brushed board, that's going to be more difficult, and I can't necessarily advise that you do that. I do fly this outside, and it is a slight breeze, but it isn't much of a breeze. You're probably looking at that right up here. But this machine can be a good trainer, as are most of the whoops or this form factor. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you should get this one, but quite honestly, I was a little bit disappointed in the flight performance. Let's get into the flight, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. As we get into the flight here, you see my finger there a little bit. It's because I'm trying to get that prop to go, and you can see it swivels over there into the camera. That camera is how I mix audio into the flight. There is no microphone on board. I continue to fuss with this a bit, so I've lost a little bit of flight time. I think I have it now. Get the goggles down, and okay, away we go. Now, as I mentioned previously, I typically fly these I pretty much fly everything in acro mode, but when I'm inside, every once in a while I run into a machine like this that I need to fly in some sort of self-stabilization. You can choose angle mode or horizon mode. Horizon mode, all it does is it gives you a greater angle of attack, and you're able to do flips and rolls with some stabilization. I don't do any in this particular flight, because what I've found with doing flips and rolls and having a limited altitude of flying inside is that it tends to, in my case, bounce off the ground, so it doesn't look very good in my opinion. But it is something that you can do. The machine is fully capable of doing those things, provided you have the ability to get high enough and the throttle control to recover. Something else of note is in the goggles I am getting black and white and color. It mixes back and forth, but here in the DVR for some reason we are seeing all color, which is good. And then here in the basement, this gives us a little bit of test of how strong the signal is. I've heard from many people that apparently my house, oops, bonked the door, we'll have to reapproach that. Here in the house, my house seems to like FPV a lot more than many of the houses that you have. So that's something to be considered. Is you may find that if your house has got aluminum studs inside of it, or if it's made of stucco covered walls. My house is very traditional. It was built in 1985, so we have a lot of sheetrock and wood studs. Even as we pass by the heating and air system that has a lot of metal and a lot of movement and probably some electrical noise, the video signal is quite good. We get some breakup, but that's not to be expected. We've got more than one wall that's separating us from our video transmitter. As far as the goggles that I'm using the HD3 Fat Shark goggles, and I also have a LaForge V2, or excuse me, LaForge V4 module inside that works quite well. We've resumed our flight upstairs now, and you see it handles pretty well. One of the things that I think I need to draw your attention to comes up here in a couple of moments, is that once the battery starts to get a little bit low, you'll really notice it on the throttle, and that's normal for these particular machines. With brushed and 1S, it's very dependent upon the amount of juice you have left in your battery or the battery sag itself. And with the flight, you'll notice that you may want to land at that point, or you want to use a timer. I found that the flight in my particular case was running about 4 minutes, so you'd want to run a timer a little bit shorter than that, say 3 minutes and 50 seconds. You can see we climbed fairly well over that chair right there still yet here a couple of minutes into the flight. But that timer will come in handy if you're very concerned about the health of your 1S batteries. You know, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, or maybe even up to 3 minutes and 50 seconds, should leave your battery in pretty good health, should you choose to use a timer, whether it's on your radio or a pocket timer or something of that nature. Going to shoot the lamp gap here. Was a little high, but we're able to come down out of the air and get through that gap enough. Many of you may notice that we've moved some furniture around or added some furniture to the house too. I get a lot of comments about the house. I get comments about the yard. Right there, that was that climb right as we came up to the couch. That is an indicator that our battery is really starting to hurt and it's starting to get low, and now we're pretty much out of juice. I'm going to try to fly it a little bit more as I bonk all over stuff. But when you start to lose battery, it becomes very difficult to fly, and that's the end of our flight. This machine also does come with the typical lunchbox that King Kong tends to be carrying with everything. And that will allow you to get your components inside. You can actually carry some spare props, your field charger, some extra batteries, things of that nature. It'll allow you to pack it in your backpack or whatever carrying device you seem to use to get yourself to your flying locations if it's not at home like I am. Now, for those that have questions about, well, this or the Tiny 7 or the Tiny 6, I can't quite answer that. I tend to stay a little bit focused in my reviews. I have set up the Tiny 7, but I haven't done any flying outside of just a hover to make sure everything works. The Tiny 6 is still in its box, so I can't tell you right now as to which one I prefer when we get to the end of the series, so you'll want to hit that subscribe button if you want to see those videos. We'll go through all three and kind of give you the pros and cons, or at least my flight experiences, and which one I would recommend out of the series. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please leave that in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.